Good evening and welcome to this edition of Defacto Review, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is our commentator and economist Jargat of Defacto. And my name is Dilgal. We're live on Facebook at V Television. We want to hear your thoughts, so send us your comments on Twitter via #Jargat_Defacto. Coming up on the program, difficulties in obtaining mortgage loans continues. The process to reform the law in political parties may be beginning. This week, the framework statement for the 2019 state budget and a budget overview from 2012 to 21 was discussed. Former prime ministers were taken into custody again following a release. So, one of the biggest things that has been pertaining to Mongolia lately is the mortgage loans. Bank of Mongolia has received over 585 mortgage applications just in March, which is the largest number of applicants in the first quarter. And the total balance of mortgage loans has reached 42 trillion turuks, of which 2.4% is overdue and 1.9% is not non-performing. And Mr. Dambachur, the head of the Parliamentary Standing Economics Committee, said that during the last 4 years, the Bank of Mongolia has experienced a deficit of 3 trillion turuks. Why do you think this is?
And now the total sum of the balance of this mortgage, 4.2 trillion turuks, and 94,000 or so families got apartments so far. But at which cost and how things go, according to Mr. Dambachur, Mongol Bank has loss, but that loss is consisting of, this originally 2013, this mortgage scheme came out in a way that Mongol Bank had issued money injected to commercial banks at 3%, 3.5%, and the commercial banks give this money to people under 8%, covering their profit and the cost. Then people paid back, and this in a couple of years they have made Mongolian mortgage corporations, and this money goes there, and then they issue bond. That bond is bought 90% of them by Mongol Bank and 10% by commercial banks. And the very fact that we don't have so far other investors in this these mortgage corporations shows itself that there are less interested people to know exactly about the business, and about the business which is going with a way artificial lower rate than the commercial rate, which is market rate in the country. So what happened was this bond coupon is only 4.5%. And the central bank policy rate is 10%. The difference is 5.5%, which is written or noted in the commercial Mongol Bank. And bank note balance should be with a certain loss. That is coming about this 3 trillion turuks that Mr. Dambachur is talking about. But yes, as I told, there is a mortgage rate. There is certainly a result, but at which cost? What happened was, first, this mortgage scheme, which is 2.5 times less than the commercial rate, have increased the housing prices in 2013, 30% compared with the previous one. But this Mongol Bank recently issued a price index of housing, but the initial year was 2013. And I think it was quite much a political purpose, because they should start from 2012 before the this mortgage loan started. If you compare it with that, the price have increased substantially, 30 or 40%. But now, because since they are calculating from 2013, housing prices is remaining at the same level. In 2013 and 2014 July was the highest rate, 20% increase from this increase, and now it goes back at the level of 2013. But I think it's very much political calculations, because it should start from 2012. One. Secondly, this business is profitable for commercial banks. They are receiving certain money at 3.5%, and they give it back, sell to people at 8%. So that's the results of the mortgage loan so far.
And I know that most mortgage loans are being issued primarily by the government or the Bank of Mongolia, and people have been actually having difficulties getting loans from commercial banks in actuality. Do you think it's possible to provide the financial possible fundings for these people?
Today, this 8%, this discount rate that people are looking for, applying for, many of them, are very limited because it is consisting of about 200 a year, about billion tugriks. This 8% is available from this Mongolian mortgage corporations through Mongol Bank. Instead of the people who have received a loan and they are paying back with this money, they are extending that loan. It's limited, and not everybody can have it. But government is issuing from the budget also another 120 billion or so a year, which is not going through this 8% scheme, but it is going mostly to the special housing projects of the government for elderly people, invalid, disabled people, or the teachers, etc., with other purpose. So I think this 8% is not anymore possible to extend it. So it is very limited.
And the cost of housing is very high in Ulaanbaatar specifically, and despite this, Mongolians are not able, to afford it. So why do you think the increase in housing price is due to this mortgage loan program?
Yes, it is due. It was increased 30% actually in 2013 compared to 2012. But it's very modest calculation. Otherwise, it is almost 50% increase of the prices. And today, on the average, the prices today is at that level of 2+ million tugriks per square meter, which is still regarded expensive compared to other even developed countries. And we have now this price, high price enough, and though this price staying at the level of 2013, we find 2013 we find still less possible to extend this one until we make houses which meets the demand of Ger district, which should be relatively lower price. And for that, there should be a completely different mortgage program, because one, it's clear that mortgage program should continue because they keep receiving a certain amount of money. With that, they can extend. But second, what is clear is with the current scheme, 30% of the price of the housing should be paid first. Okay, the remaining is 8% per year interest rate. But today, we have 80,000 apartments being built, out of which 30,000 are completed, but still empty, because the people cannot afford buying that. And those people who could afford paying 30% of housing prices, they have finished. Now we have people who cannot pay that, so they need to change the mortgage scheme.
And as you said, like the Mongolian people are kind of very reliant upon this mortgage program. How long do you think that this dependency will last?
It will last until the Ger district people, 200,000 families, have affordable housing, which means they need, as I suggested several times in the program called 6 Steps Towards Changing Your Land for Apartments. First of all, this land of their fence where their ger is in should be registered as a property of these people. Once it's registered as a property, certificate granted, it can be moving into the circle of money, and it can be kind of collateral for the next project, etc. But the people in Ger district is not only to be offered against their land apartments, but they should be a part of also profit of all this process. So that's first. Second, Now the rulers say that they will have a satellite cities, they will make 1, 2, 3. It's good idea, but you should make sure that in this satellite city people live and work. Otherwise it will be a dead city. People just go to sleep there. So that's why it is very important to have highways connected with these satellite cities.
And moving on to our second topic of the night, the Parliament actually established a working group to reform the law on political parties and the election law. The Open Society Forum, the Democracy, and the International Institute for Support for Elections implemented the Political Funding, Ethics, Engagement, and Accountability Project with the support of the EU to contribute to this improvement of transparency and accountability of the political financing. Do you think, who do you think benefits the least from the lack of transparency and accountability of political party financings?
First of all, who is a victim of all this situation is all Mongolians. Because the situation of secrecy around political party financing and campaign financing is the source of corruption in this country. Why? We don't know how much and how many people donate to the political parties. But by the size of spending at the elections, which comes several billion tugriks, up to 100 billion tugriks, and that is quite big sum. And these are donations over the by law allowed sums. 10 million tugriks by a corporation and up to 3 million by individuals. And we know that these political parties are receiving way large money from one donation. That's why those who are sponsoring political parties are now already ruling the country through these political parties. They are buying kind of high-ranking political positions, ambassadorship. They do whatever they want with their money, with our public governance. They win tender. So through all this non-commercial, non-market means, Mongolians lose a lot of money in our property. Why? Because they're misusing it, mishandling it. They are the very widespread corruptions. And as a result, who is paying all this? We, the people, paying through taxes. So that's why that's why it's so important to have these political party financings transparent.
And some researchers have suggested that political parties should be financed by the state budget. Do you think this is like a feasible option for our country?
Well, political democracy we cannot imagine without political parties, because you vote for certain institutions to give full public power, government power. So that's why this political institution so far is only political parties, and those political parties to be transparent. In order to have them transparent, like we need to use methods that are used in developed democracies. In Germany, for example, say political parties legally create certain amount of money, and the state is matching that fund at the conditions that they declare completely clearly everything of donations. If they miss something, they will cut it. And now in Germany, for example, without state budget support, political parties cannot exist, for example. And even those political parties which has no seats in the parliament still follow the same principles. You have created a certain fund, you have raised certain fund, the state is also matching. In such a way they make sure, state makes sure that the people don't buy power. I think this is the only way we have to follow.
Yeah. And I know that the financial financing reports are or should be available during both election periods but as well as non-election periods. But currently in Mongolia, it's only available during election periods. And even the non-election period financing reports are not available to the public and even to the members themselves of the political parties. What do you think this means?
This means a lot, unfortunately, very bad things. If you ask now our 76 parliament members about their their party financing, except two persons. One is the Democratic Party head, the other is the People's Party head.
Yeah.
Except two that persons, nobody knows exact amount how much money really they have received. And you know, an organization where members don't know how much money is coming to the organization, only the boss knows, such organization called mafia. So that's what is the situation with our political party. So we ask, we appeal our political parliament members to ask their own party political financing and develop own internal democracy. Without that, they have very little moral right to teach us how we should be democratic society. So I think that's why Mongolian non-political organizations, Mongolian civic societies altogether should demand these political parties to disclose their finances. Yes, according to our law, we have certain organizations to check it, to disclose it, to make audit, but they are not doing because their function is not very clearly specified in laws. That's what the political parties are using and creating corruption in the society to such a level that we have hardly find now a way to fight with. So our democracy is in threat now.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the third topic of the night, the 2019 state budget was recently released or discussed last week, and the total budget revenue is expected to increase by 1.9 trillion turuks, and it was also noted that the government hopes to reduce the repayment rate for debt services by 3 billion turuks by next year. And the budget deficit to GDP is expected to be 6.1 in 2019 and 4.3% in 2020 and 2.5% in 2021. And have you had a chance to look at this state budget? And if so, what are the parts that stood out to you?
You just now said about 1.9 trillion turuks increase in the revenue side. According to Minister of Finance, Mr. Batar, he said this one is coming from 370 billion turuks is coming from increase of minerals or commodities, and 1.5 is coming from economic activities, economic growth of economic activities, which means that first the royalty, etc., this sort of fee will be increased up to 370 billion turuks, and 1.5 trillion comes from the taxes imposing on businesses.
And another part of the state budget was the mention of the Irdent plant, and this is still being discussed. How do you think this will affect the tax rate for Irdent in the next year?
Irdent is and it was always one of the largest player of our tax income, and according to Minister again that he is regarding Irdent is like 100% state-owned company, in spite of this disputes going on about 49% shares of Russia purchased by Mongolian company and the court decisions around that. So he regarded it's 100% coming to the dividend is coming or tax payment is coming 100% to the state budget. 175 billion turuks income is expected. Okay.
And lately, we've had numerous wage strikes formed by the workers in health and science sectors. And this year, in the IMF program, there is expected to be no salary increases whatsoever. So, what do you think the budget expenditure for civil servants will be in the next year?
According to the conditions we have agreed with IMF under this extended program, they are not supposed to be increase of salary of public servants. But however, for example, the medical workers saying that there is no increase since 2014. It's what, five years. Yeah. And meanwhile, there was an inflation and things are becoming expensive. In particular, within this period, Tugrik has gone almost twice devalued. So things, in particular, in Mongolia, we buy many things, mostly things from abroad. So commercial things are becoming expensive. So the teachers are striking now, and it is followed also by the medical workers are on the strike, and also teachers are following. We spend 9% of our state budget for health care in this branch or healthcare, and 15% for education. And for small countries, it's relatively as much as you can afford, how much you have all together in your hand. And now, but the issue is, it is how much we can afford, but the issue is now how much we can have economy from the other sectors, from other expenses. Where are our priorities? Our priority is healthcare and education, right?
Yeah.
Not to having making houses, collecting money from all people and paying for few people houses, which is distorting market, increasing housing prices. So the government is to think on their priority first. Second, of course they cut costs, in particular luxury things, expenses the government offices have. So this is one thing. The other thing I want to mention here is recently there was a Economic Freedom Index issued by the Heritage Foundation based in Washington, D.C. It's unlike the other Freedom Index from Canada, the Fraser Institute. It goes on a very short format, and it says that Mongolia has 20% of all domestic income comes from the state domestic revenue. 20% comes as a state budget revenue. Income, but they spend 37% of the economy through the budget. The remaining 17%, the balance 17% is usually borrowed or asked from international organizations to pay the gap. And this is quite some number, which Mongolia we spending more than we are earning still. And it is not very good signal. So that's why we need to not only decrease that balance deficit, but also have more economy on the side of spending.
And moving on to our fourth topic of the night, last month former Prime Ministers Bayer and Sakhanbilig were taken into investigative custody by the Independent Authority Against Corruption. And on Thursday morning, a month after, so May 10th, following a court ruling, they were released. However, after a complaint from the prosecutor's office, the previous court order was canceled by a higher court, and then they were taken back into custody for another month. What do you make of this court decision to release them and then take them back into custody?
Well, unfortunately, the country is now in confusion. It's very hard to believe in our judiciary system, which is making the same decisions, two different decisions within few hours.
Yeah.
And we don't know to which judge to believe. And two former prime ministers were arrested. Two former prime ministers were arrested for a whole month, for 1 month, and then they have extended for another month, as we have just now, as you said. So now there's questions that the ex-prime minister Sakhanbilig wrote a public letter, open letter, in which he said, I was just questioned, interviewed only once during whole month. And now they're extending it for another month. And the early morning they said, okay, they will be on bail. They will be taking passport so they don't travel abroad. And then it's changed the way they're going to interview them. So now many questions raised among public. One is what's happening. One, the people are, because this corruption issue was gone for many years, people tend to blame the leaders, prime ministers, presidents. But on the other side, the people say, what happens if prime ministers are arrested and kept like this? What will happen to the ordinary people? That the question is coming. And as ex-prime minister Sakhanbilig mentioned in his letter about the Wyszyński, that Wyszyński is Soviet Union prosecutor or procurator, how they say, early 30s for 6 or 7 years. He was the main player of their Stalin Great Purge of killing several million Russians. And he is famous for saying that the arrested should prove that he is innocent. Another thing he said, everything should be under the law. So laws to be made for covering actions of the state. This sort of statements he made, and it's really, it's a very scary person. And we do remember also the purge in Mongolia after Stalin. So according to Sarhambele, that's the method using, you know, and we changed our laws, and we, according to our law, people are innocent until it is approved by the court, and by court, until that he's innocent. So people are now divided majorly in this country. And we are waiting for our decision makers to give answer to people. Why would people be arrested and kept for so long for political decisions that is made actually by the parliament itself? So a lot of questions are raising, and people are worried, and we are waiting for very clear explanation from the authority in what is exactly going on, and theoretically how long these people can be kept. Until next elections, or until some other things happening, or it is distracting public opinion from certain points. So people are in their questions now. It's in a way, in big, people are divided largely.
And it was also mentioned that in the recent trial proceedings that their attorneys were not present. Why do you think this was?
That's good questions to ask our judicial system. All these things for me to show that there is a certain procedure which is not going very clear in this country. And the people also assume some that maybe it is a matter of revenge of the system, inside of the system. So I think these days coming should prove one of these two parts is right.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us for this week's Defacto Review. And please join us next week at the same time for a roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Good night.
Thank you very much for watching us tonight. We were on Facebook Live, and it will be also, you can rewatch our program on jargaldefacto.com website from tomorrow. Thank you very much for sharing the time this evening.